Well, good
Good
morning.
morning.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Thursday, July 25, 2024, Little Hoover Commission hearing on artificial intelligence and state government, where we are going to once again visit the issue of artificial intelligence with a particular focus on this meeting. I'm Pedro Nava. I'm chair of the Little Hoover Commission. Thank you all for joining us today. Let me introduce the other commissioners who are here with us virtually. Joining us today is Vice Chair Anthony Canella, Commissioners Dion Aroner, David Beyer, Gil Garcetti, Jose Atilio Hernandez, Jason Johnson, and Iana Sidley. Also with us are the Commission staff, Executive Director Ethan Rarick, Deputy Executive Director Tamar Foster, Analyst Ashley Hurley, Ali Powell, and Shara McAllister, along with project managers Crystal Beckham and Daniel Harris McCoy. We're live streaming today's hearing on Zoom and being joined by members of the public who are attending remotely, and they will be muted during the hearing. We will have a public comment session at the end. Those who wish to make a comment will be unmuted during that public comment session. If you'd like to make a public comment, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom by clicking on the hand icon and join our public comment queue. Those who have joined us by phone may either dial #9, that's *9, to raise their hand on Zoom or send an email to the Little Hoover Commission at our email address, letting us know that you want to address the commission. Please provide the phone number from which you have joined the meeting so our staff knows who to unmute. Staff will be monitoring raised hands and emails requesting comment throughout the duration of the hearing. As is usual at commission hearings, public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker. The video and the audio of our hearing witnesses will be turned on when it is their opportunity to speak. Commissioners' audio and video will be turned on throughout the duration of the hearing. Commissioners, you may mute yourself if you wish. Please remember to unmute yourself if you want to make a comment or ask a question during the hearing. We are recording today's hearing, and at its conclusion, staff will place a permanent link to the recording on our website and upload it to our YouTube channel. The commission will hold a business meeting immediately after the hearing, which will also be accessible to the public. And now to the substance of today's hearing. This is our third hearing in our study on artificial intelligence. This study builds on the commission's 2018 report. I think that's worth mentioning again. We first took a look at artificial intelligence way back in 2018 when we had a report on AI. We urged lawmakers to adopt an AI agenda focusing on public engagement and protecting core values: autonomy, responsibility, privacy, transparency, and accountability. Our first hearing, held in May of this year, presented an overview of California's efforts thus far to incorporate AI into state government operations and began to outline best practices for future implementation. The second hearing, held last month, assessed how artificial intelligence can help California state government better serve its vulnerable populations, with a focus on addressing food insecurity. Today's hearing will consider best practices for purchasing AI applications and mitigating risk through the procurement process. It will also examine how the state can best train its workers to use AI. I want to thank Commissioners Beyer and Commissioner Johnson for serving on the subcommittee for this study and for their leadership on this topic. I also want to make sure that I thank staff for once again preparing a well-researched background memo that was included in the package that I think will be very useful to commissioners as well as members of the public in outlining principles with respect to AI and some of the issues that touch upon procurement. I will also, with respect to the witnesses, I got to remember to mention this, for those witnesses, our commissioners have reviewed the material and in all likelihood have questions and comments, so that if during your presentation you find that you're being interrupted, I apologize, but you should consider that a compliment because it's indicative of the commissioner's interest in what you've said so far and the material that they've read. Now I'd like to ask Project Manager Daniel Harris McCoy to introduce the first witness.
Thank you, Chair Nava. Our first witness is Dr. Brandie Nonnecke.
Dr. Nonnecke is founding director of the CITRIS Policy Lab, headquartered at UC-Berkeley. She is an associate research professor at the Goldman School of Public Policy, where she directs the Tech Policy Initiative, a collaboration between CITRIS and GSPP to strengthen tech policy education, research, and impact. Dr. Nonnecke is the director of Our Better Web, a program that supports empirical research, policy analysis, training, and engagement to address the rise of online harms. She serves as co-director at the Berkeley Center for Law and Technology at Berkeley Law and the UC-Berkeley AI Policy Hub. Dr. Nonnecke is also the host of Tech Hype, a groundbreaking video and audio series that debunks misunderstandings around emerging technologies and explores effective technical and policy strategies to harness emerging technologies for good. Dr. Nonnecke, you may begin your testimony.
Thank you so much, Daniel, and thank you all for having me today. Good morning, members of the Little Hoover Commission. I am very pleased to talk with you today about California's procurement and risk mitigation guidelines that are specifically focused on generative AI, which is something I will bring up in my testimony, as well as AI training for state workers. There are 4 main points that I want to express in my testimony today. The first, we must broaden our focus beyond generative AI. While generative AI has garnered significant attention, it is crucial that our focus extends to all forms of machine learning, even from simple linear and logistical regression models to those complex neural networks like the marvels of machine learning that we're engaging with today. These technologies, even the simpler forms of machine learning, are making consequential decisions that impact California residents' lives profoundly. We must ensure that our procurement and risk mitigation guidelines encompass the full spectrum of AI technologies. My second point, we're at the very early stages of developing technical and socio-technical standards for responsible AI. Now, assessing and managing AI risks is going to take a very long time for us to iron out. Establishing these standards will take years. Yet, currently, there are already third-party auditors, sort of a booming cottage industry developing of third-party auditors, licensors, and certifiers who are claiming their ability to appropriately evaluate the technical and socio-technical risks of AI and appropriate risk mitigation strategies. My one word of caution is that at this early stage, when even the standards bodies like ISO, IEEE, and the European Nonnecke are grappling with what those standards should be, it's very important that we be careful about engaging with those vendors and doing due diligence. And I'm raising this point because for many AI companies, especially smaller AI companies, some of the larger, they will be using third-party auditors. And also to mention, there is a federal law proposed by Hickenlooper called the Vet AI Act, which would require these third-party audits. We are definitely going to be seeing a third-party auditing industry develop, and we need to make sure that the state is prepared to be able to efficiently and accurately validate whether or not those third-party audits of an AI system are robust enough to mitigate and manage the risks posed to the residents of California. My third point is that procurement evaluation should be based on consequential risks, not necessarily the type of AI used. Now, of course, I understand that the executive order signed by Governor Newsom was specifically focused on generative AI and tasked the agencies and departments across the state of California to focus on generative AI. This is probably a good point at which to say the views expressed by myself do not represent the University of California or the Board of Regents. I think that this is a very short-sighted move. As I mentioned previously in my testimony today, there are more forms of simple machine learning currently in use across the state of California that are essentially surreptitiously making decisions that are affecting the causing consequential risk to individual rights of residents across the state.
Let me make my first interruption of the meeting. Please. I apologize, but Commissioner Byer has his hand raised. So if you'd be so kind to just give us a moment so that he can raise the issue.
Thank you, Chair Nava. I appreciate your testimony and look forward to hearing more of it. The reason for interrupting is to at least speaking for myself, try and set some context. We as a commission have very good staff. They wrote really good background memo for our hearing in May and again for this hearing. And this may be the wrong analogy or a strained analogy, but we're charged, our statutory mandate is to give advice to the executive branch and the legislature. So there are a variety of tools that can be used to effectuate that. On the executive side, obviously, executive orders are possible. We could suggest to the governor, for example, that he amend his executive order. We can suggest to the legislature that they take up Scott Wiener's bill or Senator Allen's bill. So I guess what I'm looking for is, if you can, not just an answer to this question, but generally, give us guidance on a pretty big structural question, which is, you have a technology, a capability, as you stress, that is not just generative AI, but technology evolves. And as we've seen since 2018 in our first report on AI, it's fast and dynamic. So I think life experience suggests statutory changes are not always the best way, because hard to amend a statute through the legislative process. So if you could be sensitive to that point, the analogy would be, we're going into an auto showroom and we're going to buy a car. It's a station wagon, it's a convertible, it's an SUV. We know about the owner's manual. The staff provided us lots and lots of details about the specifics of the governor's executive order. What we're looking for guidance on is the best governance tools to use for this new technology. And we've already seen controversy about the specificity of those tools. Should there be Defense Production Act limitations? Should there be size limits on the data sets, et cetera? So if you could help us, and I'm going to basically say something less wordy for the other witnesses, help us understand your perspective on law versus regulation versus order, adaptability, because I think that's one of the key components of what we're struggling with. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Yes, I would love to get to what are some of the levers that you all can pull to address the shortcomings that I have seen in the executive order, and not to downplay the incredible work that California Department of Technology and the other offices have done. First, what I would say is, yes, I think that the executive order should be amended. The technology is constantly changing. Just earlier this week, Meta released Llama 3.1, which comes in 3 capabilities, the largest being a 405 billion parameter frontier model, open source. That's a game changer. This is going to influence companies, startups, governments using this technology. So my first recommendation would be to amend the executive order to include all forms of machine learning, with a particular focus on oversight where the use will have consequential risks to individual rights. To me, it doesn't matter if you're using a simple linear regression or you're using a neural network. If the decision of that system will adversely impact a California resident, it must go through a very strenuous due diligence process. Now, whether or not there should be a law, we should pass a law. I have other views on Senator Wiener's bill, SB 1047, right, with the scoping of model size, because what's going to happen, companies, developers are just going to use smaller compute and do it in tranches to avoid that oversight early on. I don't think it's going to achieve the intended goals that it seeks to. Let me see here.
Yeah, to be clear, we're not a legislative committee, and we're not here to amend Senator Wiener's bill.
I know, but whether or not you should support it or say that these are some of the changes.
No, the dilemma, and this faces Congress as well as state legislatures, is how to set up the architecture, not how to fill the house with furniture, how to set up the architecture that's sustainable. And so there are good historical examples. the Telecommunications Act of 1934, and they didn't get amended for decades.
Until 1996. Well. My PhD is in telecom.
Right. So that's kind of my point is, what have we learned from the passage of other laws about how to build in flexibility? And you know better than I do, Section 230 in social media, that was a arguably unintended set of consequences. We want to avoid harm, and the tools that we choose to recommend are really, really important. So don't shy away from the legislation, but we don't need a critique of Wiener's bill.
I totally understand. So what I would recommend, some concrete actions that should be taken here. First, I will say I think that through the executive order, this has pushed state agencies and departments to put in place governance processes and leverage existing governance processes that they already had. Now, we attack procurement as the first point because oftentimes they're procuring these technologies and can put pressure on those vendors to do a risk assessment and risk mitigation. I would emphasize that for the state, it would be to continue to build out that robust governance process throughout their established risk assessment, third-party risk management processes. This is something that I have advised the state of California, the state of Washington, and I led the University of California's responsible AI strategy and implementation. There should not be an entirely new bespoke review process just for these frontier models and generative AI. Instead, build it into the security assessment, privacy assessment that we already have in place, ensuring that those additional questions that we need to ask about these tools, given some of their unique characteristics, are included in that process. So I do think that we are on the right path. It's just very important to me that any of the framing that we put on this house, the way that we build it, is not only fit for purpose for generative AI tools, but all tools that are going to be used to make decisions or influence decisions that affect our residents' rights.
Well said.
And then I have.
Yeah, go ahead. You were at point 3, and I think you were going to get to point 4.
Yep, I have my fourth. So you all asked about training for AI state workers. Again, the technology is quickly moving. Who would have thought that Meta would release the state-of-the-art frontier model, the most advanced frontier model, as open source? This has huge consequences. Not only will it be used by innovators, developers, public servants, but it will also be used by authoritarian governments to create deepfakes to influence our election, swindlers to create advanced phishing scams. This is a whole other area now that we have to contend with. The state itself is going to receive attacks from the use of this frontier model called Llama 3.1. So what do I recommend? I would recommend ongoing training for personnel within state agencies, looking at ongoing education and training. They should cover the basics not only of AI as we perceive it within the field, but also the use of statistical modeling, discussing its potential benefits and the risks, and training on how do we best identify and manage those risks. To tie this up in a nice bow at the end, I said at the beginning of my testimony that we are currently in a position where we do not fully understand what are all of the socio-technical risks of AI. Moving forward, it's going to be evolving as the technology changes, and we need to continue to equip those state workers with that training. Now,
yeah, Commissioner Beyer. You're muted. David, you're muted.
I want to focus on the training component. As we heard from the Secretary for the Department of Technology, they're set to release this month a set of training guidelines And as we understand it from what's in the public domain, the initial training will be for senior management, followed by training for other workers. Given the breadth, depth, and complexity of what's necessary, and you said it extremely well, how can the state assure a training structure that is big enough, meaning has enough scope to train the workers whose jobs touch on AI, which I submit is 75% of the workers. So you can't just train the senior management. You can't train all the workers in a week one. What's a good model for structuring the training of tens of thousands of people in a continuous, evaluatable way that keeps up with technological evolution and thousands of use cases?
Yeah, thank you very much. This is very important and something that me and my team develop. We do develop sets of trainings, and the way that we have done it to address this challenge is that we have a core set of trainings that are fundamental across all use cases, laying the foundation for what is machine learning, what are the different types of machine learning, what are these frontier models, what are the benefits, what are the risks, what are the emerging risk mitigation strategies, the state of the art, like the NIST AI risk management framework. We also reference the European Union, since they have passed the most comprehensive law in the world, requiring two things: conformity assessments, that AI fits technical standards, and second, what they call FRIAs, fundamental rights impact assessments. That's important for even people within California, within the United States, to know about. I'm making a belabored point here, but those companies are going to be deploying their tools in the European market as well. There's no reason why the people within the state of California shouldn't also be able to review that. So a core of the technology and as it advances, and I would also recommend that there be domain-specific trainings of the likely risks that will occur within a domain, whether that be the risk of bias and discrimination, decision-making, resource allocation, etc. I think that there should be tailored. I also worry, as you made the point, of it just being at a high level of leadership, because oftentimes those individuals working within the state departments and agencies, they better know the intricacies of the problem that they're working on, right? The greatest AI agent is somebody who's worked in a position for 20 years, right? And they know, they can spot things and see it. We also need them to be able to evaluate these systems. My final remark is based off of the guidelines that were provided for high-risk AI systems. It currently needs approval by the CTO and CIO. I would encourage the state to also ensure that they are reviewing with the program managers, officers, those people who are working on the front lines of the problem. They will be best positioned to know what are the potential vulnerabilities of the use of this system in their application area.
So just two quick follow-ups. First, just to put on the record, it would be incomplete if the state said everyone should take the Coursera course on artificial intelligence. I've done it, it's good, but that's not remotely sufficient. So there's not an online training solution standalone that people can just plug and play.
No, there is not.
And second, maybe you could comment on the risk of bureaucratic sclerosis. That is, that there's so many people who were involved in approving something using so many different disciplines and criteria that the mother may I syndrome, you end up taking a really long time to adapt a useful technology and it becomes obsolete or too expensive. How do we avoid that?
For your second point, to me, the risk-based approach, which was pioneered by the European Union, is brilliant for this. It allows a first blush analysis, a quick analysis of, are we applying this AI tool in a high-stakes setting? For example, are we deciding whether or not somebody can have access to the SNAP food program based off of other data? Obviously, there's a high risk there. If there are false positives and false negatives, especially false negatives, somebody doesn't get access to their food services, that's incredibly consequential. That should go through a more rigorous process. Now, for lighter applications of AI, for example, the state of Washington, I'm working with them. Their natural resource agency is using computer vision to monitor this type of seaweed that grows in the water near them for management. Low risk, use the technology. So it's all about whether or not there are these consequential risks affecting individuals' rights, and that would take a more rigorous review process.
This is Pedro. Let me ask, when you were talking about third-party auditors,
yeah,
is there a single standard for certification of what it takes to be a third-party auditor?
I'm very happy you asked that question. There is not. And right now there's sort of a power grab over who will set that standard. IEEE has established a program called Certified, CERTIF, capital A, capital I, AIED, Certified. I'm currently taking that training so that I can better state whether or not I feel it's rigorous enough. There's also another one from IAPP, which is a privacy organization. Even though it's a privacy organization, the training is on AI auditing more broadly. So essentially, those are the two options right now for those third parties to get certified themselves in order to then further be able to certify the technology that's being used.
So, and I have another question. Without identifying anybody or any department, when you have done training, right, AI training for those organizations, and let's say for the state of California, but not, without identifying departments, I don't really want to know. What do you encounter as it relates to how much do people need to understand in order to take the training and be able to then pass on what you're training them on, right? I mean, I could be wrong on this, but this is new stuff. There's not that many people like you who are so conversant with all of the aspects and the elements and all the moving parts. So you're asked to go into a department or into an agency that's contemplating the use of AI and provide training for them. What do you find the level of acceptance or the level of competence of the people you are training to learn what it is that you're teaching them to do?
Well, I pride myself on meeting everybody where they're at. And I take an approach where I think even though we might be all talking about the term artificial intelligence, we might all be talking about different definitions of artificial intelligence. Now, in my experience working with several state governments, first, I just lay out what is artificial intelligence, demystify it to people. There is this hype cycle, especially right now around generative AI, that makes it sound like it's some magical oracle thing that, there's no way of understanding its complexities. I don't believe that. I think that we can communicate to people what the technology actually does and how it works. Second, I have been incredibly impressed with the level of knowledge of the potential risks and benefits of the use of this technology. State personnel understand that it could really benefit their work by increasing efficiency and effectiveness, but they're also aware that there could be harmful spillover effects of discrimination. And they want to know, how do we actually harness the power of this technology in a way that allows us to do our job and serve people better? And so I've been very impressed with that.
Okay, good. And before, I'm looking at other commissioners, but before we thank you for your testimony and contribution, Jason Johnson, you served on the subcommittee. I was just wondering if you had any thoughts.
Yeah, I take particular note of your comments around looking at this more holistically and and the various other issues that need to be addressed, and trying to look at it in the context of those other issues. I just wanted to know if you had anything more you want to expand on that specifically, which initiatives and how you would recommend that we support those initiatives.
The initiatives that are being put forward via the executive order,
or already in place.
Yes, I think that there are a few things that are going well. I do appreciate that CDT has focused two ways they determine risk. One is data loss, the risk of data loss. Is it a private data? Important question, right? The release of that could be harmful to the individual. The second is whether or not there are consequential risks. I think that's great. That helps anybody to get back to Commissioner Byer, I think was the one who had said, to get back to the point of how do we make this process more streamlined and effective so that we don't fall into a trap where we're just sitting arguing and we cannot harness the technology. So by using those two initial assessments, it will allow them to better move the project through in a quicker way to do appropriate risk assessment. Still, I'm going to just keep hammering on this. We cannot only be focused on generative AI. It's incredibly short-sighted. I hope that you will welcome me back in the next year when we're talking about the intersection of AI and quantum computing, because we will no longer have encryption, right? So what are we going to have, a new process just for quantum computing enabled processes? And so it's more of taking this risk-based approach, being technology agnostic, and then doing appropriate risk management and mitigation.
I have a follow-up question, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Of course.
So, there's a group of people, particularly some in Silicon Valley right now, that are being rather vocal about their frustration with possible regulations of AI at the national level. Some of these people have also been very frustrated by the federal administration's lack of support for cryptocurrencies and other newer technologies. In your opinion, as we try to address some of these forces that are frankly anti-regulation or resistive to regulation, your suggestion of finding ways to work with the CDT and other existing methods, could we avoid some of the pushback by perhaps not having specific legislation, but rather, again, joining with existing initiatives and efforts?
Yeah, and that's absolutely what's happening right now. It's a form of soft law. Essentially, the way that the departments and agencies are interpreting responsible AI governance is going to shape how industry builds and deploys their AI tools. The state of California has a large purchasing power. Vendors need to sell their products. State of California government, huge procurer. It is actually shaping. So regardless of whether or not we have a comprehensive federal law or state law, the actions taken by procurement within the state of California government is shaping the industry. To get to your second point about regulation stifling innovation, I firmly do not believe that. It's a trope that is often used. Regulation can spur appropriate and healthy market competition. Look at the clean energy sector, one of the most highly regulated, also one of the most innovative and growing exponentially. So I would just push back on that point. Okay. Not made by you, but
yeah, I understand. Thank you.
Commissioner Byer has his hand up.
Yeah, just again, some guidance on the best practice of coordinating between the federal government and the state government. To date, there's been what appears to be excellent coordination between Governor Newsom and President Biden at the staff level about the two, in each case, two executive orders and many of the details. We do have an election coming up. We don't know how long that's going to continue. So ideally, would be coordination so that there's a national market and national procurement process. But our mission as a commission is to focus on California. And so there are some, I'll call them likely minimum requirements under state, either executive order or law. And maybe you could focus on those a little bit. And the one in particular that I'd like you to focus on is safety, because the Commerce Department has already set up a national safety office. When you talk to people in the venture community, that's where they're focused their attention on. Like, what are the rules of product-specific things that are going to get developed and get purchased by the federal government, DoD, or any other agency? So is there a need for California to have its own, like, gas mileage standard or safety certification process, whether it's done by the government or by the private sector, for its procurement? So that's safety is one example. There may be others.
Yeah, this is such a great question, right? In the void of a comprehensive federal law, what we're seeing is states moving forward. And we all know the term, the California effect, right? And we're already seeing it. We see the state of Washington, they issued an executive order that is nearly identical to that of the executive order of the state of California on generative AI. I would emphasize that actually pushing forward efforts at the state level will have an effect at the national level as they are grappling with passing anything. Now, of course, agencies are going to be developing their own guidance at the federal level and within the state of California. We're already seeing that in the work from CDT. There are security requirements and safety requirements of these systems before they can be procured. I actually think you are all very well positioned to not only help influence responsible AI governance within the state of California, but that it will also cause the California effect and influence other states and the federal government.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Let me, and looking across the commissioners, I see no other raised hands. So I want to express our appreciation to you for sharing your experience and your knowledge in this area. Thank you so much for doing that. And before we go to the next witness, I have to say, let me again congratulate staff. I think you have found these three people that you've lined up. We're just so fortunate for them to be willing to give their time to share their wisdom and their knowledge and their experience with us to help us as we form our recommendations. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Daniel?
All right. Thank you, Chair Nava. Our next witness is Lila Tretikov. Ms. Tretikov joined NEA in 2024 as partner and head of AI strategy. She most recently served as Deputy Chief Technology Officer at Microsoft, driving large-scale AI transformation. Previously, Ms. Tretikov was Senior Vice President of Engie and CEO and Vice Chair of Terawatt at Engie, where she led the company's transition to renewable energy sources. She was also CEO at the Wikimedia Foundation and Endowment, reversing its decline and introducing AI strategy. Ms. Tretikov appeared in Forbes' list of the top 100 most powerful women, was named a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader, as well as a distinguished alumna of the University of California at Berkeley. She completed graduate programs at the University of Oxford's Said Business School and Stanford University's Directors College. Ms. Tretikov, you may begin your testimony.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me with you today. I'm very honored to be here with all of you. First, I have to say that all of the opinions that I'm about to share are my own, and it's interpretations based on my experience and information available to me. And please do not consider them as authoritative, definitive. They don't reflect the organizations that I am a part of or affiliated with. I want to give you a little bit of background, my own personal background, so you know where I'm coming from with a lot of my point of views. I'm an immigrant. I grew up in a region of the world where things like freedom of speech, expression, innovation, or self-realization were not something that anyone could take for granted. And in fact, I grew up without those incredible freedoms and privileges. I left when I was 15. I left alone for this country. And I find myself extremely lucky among those who have become immigrants in the United States. And I was lucky enough to study at Berkeley, and not the least because it was the school that I could actually work and afford to put myself through, which is a very rare privilege. And as part of that, I acquired a lot of the ideals of, I grew up through the ideals of open source, open internet, and ultimately open world that influenced both my thinking and career path. I studied both artificial intelligence as part of the computer science degree at University of California, as well as art. My early experiences, my actually first experience was my own company that I started after joining the Human Genome Project as part of my UC-Berkeley work and building the first genomic browser for what back then was nascent field of biogenomics. And we used very primitive analysis, which now we no longer even call AI, but back then we called AI for this. And biologists have used that tool ever since. I really deeply, that really ingrained in me very deeply the power of how technology can fuel ingenuity and as well as socioeconomic growth and through both support and commercialization of science. So I think you already know most of my other history. I just want to say that throughout my career, I basically used that focus to empower society through technology, and that focus was really focused on protecting what we now try to call digital human rights, and that encompasses user privacy, defending freedom of information, advancing science and state-of-the-art technology while safeguarding it from misuse. And in my most recent work, I support the next wave of entrepreneurship as well as teaching the next generation of scientists and engineers. So as you asked me to talk about some of the AI opportunities today, I think we live in an incredible time in human history. And over the last few decades, and more generally since the invention of the printing press and the rise of the internet, sharing knowledge has progressively accelerated our humans progress. As recently as in 2014, when I stepped into the role of managing Wikipedia, back then at the 5th largest website, it was already clear that as humans, we were generating more knowledge and faster than we can curate and process as a society. And we needed new technologies to process it and to compress it and to actually learn from it more effectively. And that technology is clearly today that is AI. Back then, it was not as apparent. For the first time in human history, as species, we have a tool to understand complexity, whether it is complexity of what we are creating or what nature has created before us. In most situations, we use mathematics to describe complex phenomena in physics, medicine, biology, but also in things like optimization of, let's say, transport or supplies movement. But linear mathematics, as you know, falls apart as complexity increases. And over time, we have developed nonlinear techniques, which are extremely hard to solve in our approximations. So with advancement of compute, data, and AI models, we are able to reverse that pattern. And another ways to think about it, we can look at the aggregate world state and approximate rules that govern it. This is incredibly powerful as it can help us solve some of the most complex problems we face as humanity today. And this spans everything from climate change to disease, from space travel to efficient agriculture. And even more importantly, for the first time, it can help us understand ourselves from biology to neuroscience. We're literally standing at the door and sort of juggling the keys, which can unlock many of life's mysteries. One thing that is critical to understand, I feel, is about this new technology is that it is probabilistic. It is much less like a calculator that will dutifully and repeatedly produce the same answer, which we're used to since grade school. Even if the calculator produces the wrong answer, and in case the bug was introduced, it's still going to repeat that wrong answer over and over again. These systems, these new systems, especially with the advancement of generative AI, are much more like us, actually, depending on which neurons get activated and what they get as inputs, which words, which misspellings, which images, which sounds, etc. That will change what they come back with, what their outputs become. And there are many techniques been built to bring determinism to generative AI when and where it is desired. In many cases, we can get close, but it is, in current state, it is not 100% safety there. This does not mean that we should not use these systems, but it changes the patterns of how we should test, deploy, and monitor this system, because they are based on our own data and the feedback we provide them. In fact, they duplicate and even exaggerate our own biases. In 2017, I published an open ad that we titled, "We should raise AI like parents, not programmers, so they'll turn into terrible toddlers," discussing the problem of approaching AI within the old time frame, within the old frame of coding techniques that we've had for more traditional computer science. For instance, and I used an example where AI was used in recommending parole decisions in one state, and that AI inherited a strong racial bias because, of course, it was trained on the historical data. This patterns in some ways is very illuminating. It holds a mirror to how we lead our own lives and how well we govern our world. The best practices for deploying and using AI then best developed from first principles that ground us in our values and our constitution, our precedents, and our ethics. So looking at selection, deployment, and usage methodology, the current generation of generative AI, specifically AI, spans the last 50 years of development. I'm focusing more on generative AI because that's where a lot of new issues are starting to arise, and because that is the biggest wave right now, and I'm assuming that is probably where a lot of your attention is. So I'm going to just review some of the top use cases that you're probably seeing within your purview that generative AI brings to surface. The first one is summarization, and this is really important because AI can summarize and distill very large sets of information. It's important to remember that picking a vendor in this area, it's important that this vendor optimized for this particular use case, because there's many ways in which summarization implemented. There are many details that are sort of beneath the surface that are important to understand on how summarization is done and what information you are actually getting as a result of that, because some systems will put focus on some information within that summary and within that corpus of data, and others will pick something different. There are very different techniques for this, so it is important to understand what techniques the vendor is using and how relevant those summaries actually are going to be and how clear they're going to be to you. Second is creation. This is a generative use case because AI can generate documents, pictures, videos, spreadsheets, specific type of model, and that tuning on your own data set can matter a lot here, because the government probably has a lot of information already that's at its disposal. So using that to make the model smarter or more useful for the scenarios that they're applied to. And different mediums of data will require different techniques. Code generation is a very, very common scenario. AI is already significantly improving basically coding and code creation and velocity. Many companies report about 40% of their code being generated by, for example, GitHub Copilot within weeks of deploying it. Code safety, security procedures are really becoming even more important than they've ever been before. It doesn't mean that they need to significantly change, but they need to actually be implemented properly. A lot of times what we see in reality is code safety and code maintenance oftentimes is an afterthought. So once the software is developed, it's very quickly atrophies and bugs emerge, and it's not managed and secured properly.
All right, let me interrupt you. I'm sorry. Let me interrupt you for a moment. This is Pedro. Commissioner Beyer has his hand up.
Yes, thank you for your testimony, and personally, thank you for your service at Wikipedia, an important public resource. I have two questions. One, should the state of California have its own AI technical capability? That is, should it have its own compute power? Some of our witnesses at our first hearing in May suggested that. That was Stanford, I think, in Berkeley. And then second, and somewhat interrelated, is should the state have a person, an office, a commission, a thing, to protect the values you spoke so eloquently about as a safeguard, part of the governance process. Ombudsperson concept is sort of what I'm getting at, without necessarily having regulatory authority. In some ways, the Little Hoover Commission performs a similar function. The General Accountability Office does that. The Office of Legislative Affairs, or some kind of audit function in California. What I'm trying to get at is how to preserve the values you talked about. So should there be compute power entity, and should there be an auditor, ombudsperson on AI values?
This is an excellent question. Thank you for asking this. So let's start first with the second part, is how do we protect the values? And I think it's a really important fundamental questions. And I think the way that many organizations have approached that is by setting up what we call principles, or a framework for evaluating AI, and infusing our values into that. So one of the ways that that actually created and scaled a team that was called Ethics and Society, and we had an incredible woman who ran it, who probably would be very beneficial to talk to all of you, who set this up. And one way that it's possible to do this is creating a framework, and what we called it is a harms framework, which is evaluating how AI can potentially do damage, basically, in action, and provide that framework for anybody who is deploying the AI to evaluate that. And this particular framework, and I just want to bring it up for myself so I can remember the specifics of that. We grounded
so
it.
Are you talking about ELSA, the ethical, legal, social component of the Human Genome Project, where they set aside 3% of the funding for research on ethics and values?
No, that is an interesting use case as well. I am talking about the harms framework that we developed as part of Microsoft when we started developing AI technology.
Okay.
And that framework, so there were 8 principles in that framework, which is fairness, reliability, safety, privacy and security, inclusiveness, transparency, and accountability. And based on that, we built basically this grid, which every product that we deployed was evaluated before it was released. It upholds Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it holds principles of democracy, and upholds mechanisms that enabled and informed citizenry. And within that, we look at things like loss of privacy, loss of liberties, social detriment, manipulation, agency loss, economic loss, opportunity loss, physical and infrastructural damage, emotional and psychological distress, loss of dignity. So there are frameworks that can be put in place and developed for evaluating any type of technology, but AI technology specifically, in order to evaluate that. Your second question was...
Just to be specific about this. So President Biden entered into an informal agreement with OpenAI, with Microsoft, which sounds very similar. It was not a regulation, however. And what you're suggesting is kind of a self-certification by technology entities who are in artificial intelligence and related technologies.
As well as when, if California is using their own procurement methodologies, putting something like that into place for how California evaluates technologies for internal use.
Thank you.
It's a framework. Now, I think you asked us, the corollary to that question is, should there be a person who is not the necessarily a lawmaker, but somebody who has the capabilities for performing such evaluation? And my answer is absolutely. I think that would be extremely valuable. And it's a very specific skill set that is not easy to develop and takes time to develop. I'm sure some of the people who presented here are deeply steeped in that and could serve in such a role. And finally, you're talking about compute, and I think compute is an incredibly important part of this. What we're seeing right now is compute is being aggregated mostly in large corporations. In fact, it is very difficult, if not impossible, to do a lot of cutting edge, what we call state-of-the-art AI development now, if you are part of university or independent researcher or even government research. And that is, I believe, a huge disservice to the country. And within California, I think it's a big problem. And even though the corporations will donate quite a sizable amount of compute, it is nothing compared to what researchers get when they go to work in this large organization. So we see a big drain from academia going into corporate as a result.
Just a couple analogies. We don't rely on the pharmaceutical industry to do basic research because they're frankly product oriented. They're selling to patients. That's why we have the NIH. And the same way we have national labs who develop physics expertise, even though we have a defense industry to develop weaponry. So you're saying basically if you ignore the infrastructure, the compute at the nonprofit state government level, universities and researchers, you're forfeiting your opportunity to advance because you're depending on market forces to drive the direction of research as opposed to societal needs. Is that right?
That is absolutely correct. You said it way better than I have. And this is exactly what is happening right now. Academia is starved for compute, which bottlenecks their ability to test and develop new algorithms. And every time I sit down for a conversation with the deans of engineering schools, I hear the same story, that they are begging for compute resources from large corporations. And large corporations are being very generous, but at the same time, we can't expect them to be to be doing all of this for free. And we're not going to see as much of that as we ultimately need. So I'm a big proponent of government stepping in and providing compute resources for state-of-the-art research and for supporting computing labs, basically, and AI labs with that compute. Without that, they are slowly dying effectively.
Thank you.
So just to continue, I'll continue with the recommendations, and please just feel free to interrupt me. So we talked about code generation. The next use case is conversation, predominantly for information gathering. You see this with a lot of chatbots, and this is a way to engage with companies engage with customers, but governments can engage with constituents. AI is very well adapted to simulating conversations in an interview style and is particularly well suited for customer support scenarios, requests, or feedback. Of course, the fundamentals of artificial intelligence, which is translation, transcription, voice synthesis, they're particularly useful in broad scenarios where a wide range of constituents are present, making government resources and government services are much more inclusive and much more accessible to all citizens. So citizen engagement. In fact, we did some studies with with the representatives in Taiwan, or with the Minister of Taiwan, Digital Minister in Taiwan. And Taiwan is particularly interesting in how they engage in the democratic process from the technology perspective. They actually have things like public hackathons where citizens can code and create software for the country. So there are some really interesting examples out there in the world. And then fundamentally, the most important thing that we are starting to get with artificial intelligence is baseline reasoning, which is using artificial intelligence as a reasoning engine, providing it with inputs and asking it to reason through a solution or help us develop a solution, sort of almost like proving a theorem. And that can be, of course, applied to a variety of tasks. The most important thing to take out of this is that you probably have at your disposal a lot of data. The estimates are that every enterprise, in fact, across the world, about 97% of the data is invisible, meaning it sits in private domains. And that data is very valuable in terms of optimization and understanding of policies, procedures, their effects, workflows that exist today and how they can be changed to save money, improve outcomes, improve engagement. The truth is, it is probably true that majority of people who are working in government already using AI in some shape or form. Estimates show that over 70% of people do that today. Oftentimes they will not report it, or they will underreport it because they're worried about their job security. So it's worth keeping that in mind. And it's important, I think, to help people to bring that into the light so that the risks that come with usage of such technology can be managed.
Good, thank you.
So just the last quick points in terms of recommendations. These and other scenarios, while providing increases in productivity, coverage, and response time, need to be evaluated for potential vulnerabilities on a case-by-case basis. So as you deploy technology, it's important to evaluate it at initial junction and then throughout its life cycle as it gets adopted or changed over time. Users of these products must be well trained to understand impact and unintended consequences that might be present within the features of this tech. So by far, in my opinion, the most important piece of the equation is training. So training people for technical fluency, but also really basically critical thinking. A lot of times we don't get that training in school nearly and as much of depth as we need to, because individuals have to be able to evaluate and think forward in terms of consequences, especially unintended consequences of the tools that they're putting in place or actions. In fact, creating standards around what level of training is required for what type of technology, I think is really, really important. So, earlier I mentioned technology that was used to recommend parole decisions. In fact, it was implemented by 2 interns, and the outcomes of that technology was extremely powerful. So, there was a mismatch between the level of experience and probably training of the people who were producing the technology and the reality that it created for the society. So data collection and usage disclosure and verification are really important. So at the end of the day, what information has been collected from the user and how it is used and disclosed today is extremely opaque. People usually do not understand. And the laws that we have, privacy laws that we have in place today are oftentimes circumvented through obscurity. So companies make it too difficult or too long to read their terms and conditions, and too difficult to change how the data is used for the user. Data sources are really important. Data sources is what actually create and dictate how AI manifests in the world. So if the data is biased, AI will be biased. It's the most simple way to think about that. So understanding the data itself and asking for disclosures on how data is produced and created and what it represents is really important. In terms of testing, I see a hand.
Yes, you do. It's Commissioner Garcetti. Commissioner Garcetti, please.
Oh, I said, go ahead.
Yeah, please.
I will ask the question when you finish.
Oh, all right. So Commissioner Garcetti's next up, but please go ahead.
Very good. The next one is, how do we test the systems? You probably have heard of red teaming protocols as a best practice, which is interrogating the systems right before that, right as they're being developed and when they're ready, and figuring out and being able to break it in many different ways. So there's a lot of practices that are emerging. It's still very, very early, but the practices are emerging around how to test these systems. Decision-making. I think it's really critical that it's too early to delegate decision-making to machines in general. And we do this already today, not with AI. We actually do it with more pragmatic software. But I feel we need to elevate it to a much higher principles as we think about AI and as we think about integration AI, because obviously AI can invoke systems that already exist, automated systems that already exist in place. So as the first measure is, there needs to be a human in the loop, and when decision is actually being made by the system, it is the human that is executing that decision. So delegate only processing, formatting, questioning, summarization, research retrieval. All of this is fine as long as before the action is taken. We are very rapidly approaching the world where the systems become what we call agentic. They can act on human behalf, and we need to be very, very careful with that. The most simple, primitive way, when you think about talking to a chatbot, in every single case, a customer or a citizen must be able to talk to another human if they need to. Ensure peer review as part of any process. So it's not just one human, it needs to be another human checking. We use that for software, but it's not always used as best practice. Of course, understand how the users, how the vendors use data, citizen data, employee data, and how do they store it, because it's not just well enough that they have good usage principles. They need to have secure storage, and they need to have sophisticated encryption, and again, evaluate that regularly. Demand, obviously, identification, fully inspect, have a process to fully repeat this process. Don't just do this at the beginning when the procurement happens. Do this regularly, because software changes, access changes, there's constant changes to the systems. So it's really important that this process of verification and checks is repeatable and is repeated on a regular basis. In addition to that, implement observability, which is a software that's constantly monitoring what is happening on the network and what the application is doing. So measures effects of those decisions before and after any kind of change. And then just keep in mind that AI is not deterministic, it is probabilistic. So expect that it will make mistakes, and make sure that there is ways to mitigate that, or that mistakes are not significant enough to cause actual harm, as we talked about earlier. So probably the most important part about all of this is all of these capabilities are, right now I'm giving you a snapshot in time, but all of these capabilities are evolving extremely rapidly. So things that we thought were impossible a year ago are possible today. And so keeping a constant learning mindset is key.
Wonderful. Let me turn to Commissioner Garcetti, because I know he's got something he wants to put out there for us.
Indeed, I do. Ms. Tretikov, you are the second of two extremely impressive witnesses. Thank you for taking the time, and not just the time here today, but the time to prepare what you did. My expertise has nothing to do with your expertise. And I can speak for a few other, I think, commission members who share my position in that, okay, we're getting bits and parts. You want to talk about criminal law, I can talk to you as an expert on that. But on AI computers, no, I can't. But I'm learning. And we all are taking deep dives into this and want to learn. But I think you understand what our function is to bring expert witnesses like you in front of us to get information, get facts, opinions, and then for us to make recommendations to the legislature and the governor's office, usually in the legislative form. And so I don't know if you can do this right now, but if you can't, please put it in writing to us. And that would be, what are your top 2 or 3 areas that you think we need to focus on? There should be some recommendations involving that. And I said, I don't want to put you on the spot saying, give us your answer right now if you want to think about it and give it to us, but please do, because this would be very helpful to at least people like me and other commissioners.
Yeah, thank you for this question. Thank you for giving me the time. I would like to think about this further, because I don't want to just give you an answer off the cuff. One thing I will say from a high level perspective, I think it's so important that all of you are taking time on this, because the very best meaning regulation oftentimes has a lot of unintended consequences. What we've seen is GDPR. GDPR was designed to protect end user, and what side effect it created actually in many ways played into the hand of the exact companies that we were trying to put GDPR in place to protect against. So just to give you an example of that is the fact that we were requiring consent, right, allowed companies to force users to sign into their services, because otherwise, therefore, allowing them to collect even more data as a result, right? Because otherwise users won't get access to what is, in fact, our digital services that should be at this point, kind of like Wikipedia, basic human right. So one of the things that I would encourage all of you thinking about is, what are the services that we cannot live without? And how should we treat them, even if they're run by private companies? Should we allow them to be, gated? Should we allow them, should the government pay for some of that? Like, we need to be thinking through, what are the things that if they were to turn off tomorrow, the society will really be in trouble. The state will really be in trouble. So I think that needs to be sort of the fundamental thinking about that, on top of which we need to be creating guidelines. And we should not rush into that, because this is, as you're saying, it's important to understand the technology, but it's much more important to understand the consequences of it. So to marry the good intention or the right intention with the ways that companies and people can game it out. So thinking through this unintended consequences before making anything into law. So that would be my first and fundamental guidance on this. And then the second piece I would encourage us to think through is starting from the principles that exist today. So for example, the principle of privacy. How do we apply what we already have today to the new technologies that are coming into existence? Because they, at the end of the day, the same individual right needs to be protected. And now we have more tools that can disrupt that right. So I think starting from the subjects that we already have regulation about and protections around, and understanding the implication of the new technology on them is going to be really important, because it's the same pressures that we're seeing today that we've seen 10 years ago, and now that pressure is even worse. And we still have not even caught up figuring out how do we actually protect the privacy of our citizens, how do we detect defend them from harms, et cetera, et cetera. But I will take time to come up with a little bit more concrete proposals for you. Thank you for asking for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you. We are very fortunate that you immigrated to this country. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Now, I see Commissioner Byer has his hand up. I want commissioners to be aware that we have Senator Allen is going to be available at 11:45, and we still have Tom Andriola to get some information from. So go ahead, Commissioner Byer. You're muted. David, you're muted.
Commissioner Garcetti asked an excellent question. Quickly, the rough analogy would be rights of electric energy users not to be cut off without notice, or universal broadband, or some other subsidy for basic telecommunication services or other things. So I think the witness is pointing us in a direction of what's a good, valid analogy and how it could be distinguished from this situation. It's excellent food for thought.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank the witness. I noted one of the things that you said, that you were lucky to be able to attend Berkeley. I don't think luck had much to do with it. I think what you've demonstrated here is a superior intellect and great initiative and ambition, and we're grateful to have you here. So, Commissioner Hernandez.
Just want to note for the record that our two excellent speakers had great affiliations with Berkeley, so go Bears.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. Now let me go back to Daniel Harris McCoy.
Thank you, Chair Nava. Our next witness is Tom Andriola. Mr. Andriola is UC-Irvine's Vice Chancellor for Information Technology and Data and Chief Information Technology and Data and Chief Digital Officer. His role is designed to ensure the strategic use of data and technology, drive innovation through partnerships, and champion digital strategies that expand the institution's role as a leading research university, healthcare provider, workforce developer, and community partner. As a former global business and technology executive, Mr. Andriola has been at the forefront of tectonic changes to our economy and world through technology and digital transformation. He is widely sought after to speak on topics of digital transformation, data as strategy, and AI. Mr. Andriola, you may begin your testimony.
Thank you very much. And listening to the conversations recently, I'm going to try to get through my prepared comments quickly and save as much time for questions before you have to move on to your next business. I'd first like to thank the Commission for the opportunity to share my experiences and learnings, as well as how we at UC-Irvine down in Southern California have been trying to be thoughtful around this process and bring this topic into our world. And I'm going to come at it a little differently from the two previous speakers, really talking about individual role and then individuals making up organizations. And so I'd like to start with, next slide, please. I'd like to start with, a real quick anecdote. No, back one. That we live in this increasingly digital world. And I'm going to do it quickly through a story. In 2016, I gave expert testimony to the White House Commission on Cyber. We did that in a room, and the most technology that would have been used would have been a microphone and maybe a stenographer. And 8 years later, here we are. We might be doing this, all in a room together, but we're doing it over Zoom. I like to say that look at how digital technologies has evolved our ability, and the data that comes from it allows us to bring the topic of AI into our world in a very meaningful way. You are recording this through computer vision. You have a file that captures the visual images of this recording. You have the ability to transcribe this, so a transcription automatically captured. You have the ability to capture the words, but also the tonalities of my words. And you have the opportunity to also connect with and create a file around ambient sound. What does that mean? That means this concept of algorithms can do lots of things that we didn't do when we just got in a room together. For example, we see, looking at transcripts and looking at tonality, sales professionals are now using AI tools in the form of algorithms to create better and more effective selling processes working with their prospects and customers. We see behavioral health professionals start to look at the computer vision oriented files to quote unquote, understand through facial muscle analysis or eye movements what might be happening and deeper insights into their patients as an augmentation to what they might have through their own kind of using their own eyes and ears. So this is the increasingly digital world that I see it a part of. And one of the things that I always love to talk about, because I've had a chance to live and work internationally, is one of the things that stands out about being an American to me when I've lived in other places is that we embrace this art of the possible. And it's why the topic of AI brings both this hope and promise on one side, as well as the fear and anxieties on another. And it was our 26th president, Theodore Roosevelt, who was a strong advocate of progressive policies, who said, we need to embrace progress, but also acknowledge the potential for unintended consequences. And I think this is what brings us to topics and conversations like this today. And so I worked earlier this year with the commission as a way of saying, look, here's how we at UC-Irvine, a large organization, research university and health system, 30,000 employees, 37,000 students, we're almost a small city. How did we think about bringing this to our community? And so if you can go to the next slide real quickly, what universities do really, really well is this concept of let 1,000 flowers bloom. We have people who are very thoughtful, very innovative, who are push the boundaries type people, not just in our faculty members, but our students all the same. And so we encourage people to play with these tools. And one of the things that we recognize is we went back and we looked at, the GPT for us stands for general purpose technology, meaning we put it in the same categorization as the internet, electricity, the turbine engine, in that it's going to have profound changes over time to the way that we live, the way that we work, and the way that we interact. And I think for all of us who, we lived through the internet era, and I was right in the middle of all that in the early part of my career, we see those changes not as just the moment that we got Netscape or the moment here that we got ChatGPT, but over a horizon of time that a lot of things change. And if you go back to 1997, how much of the way that you navigated your world do you still do in the same way? I would argue is very little. And so as we look at the horizon of this, we need to understand that it's going to be a huge amount of change over a long period of time, most of us can not predict what that will look like. But we started with letting 1,000 flowers bloom. And we also, in talking to historical economists, they demonstrated to us that there's a pattern here with these type of tectonic changes, which is there's an individual journey that we need to recognize. In terms of people need to investigate and wrap their head around the topic or the changes intellectually, and then they need to get their fingers in and start playing with it. For them to learn to figure out, how can I actually use this in what I do and way I live and how I interact with others? And then they start to put it into solutions in early stages that I call their own productivity hacks. And then they start to think about, how can it change our jobs? And then leaders in organizations then say, how do we scale this so that we're taking advantage of the benefits everywhere? And so we started on this journey of saying, we need to encourage people to be able to play with this. We rolled out something at our university called ZotGPT. Now, we didn't try to replicate, what the technology companies were doing, but we tried to give our community members, this was faculty, staff, students, medical professionals, a safe and secure environment where they could play. Because when we leaned in and said, we asked the question, okay, you haven't started investigating and experimenting with these tools. Why? There were two very, very consistent answers. One is, I hear it's not secure. And two, I hear it doesn't respect privacy. And so we created a fenced-in playground, let's call it, that we called .GPT, to give people a chance to say, here's a secure environment where you can go start to experiment, to get your own experiences in what these tools are, how they worked, what does prompting mean, how to reduce hallucinations. And we felt like every community member needed to be supported to, quote unquote, start that journey, and that the steps of the journey can't be skipped. Next slide, please. So after letting 1,000 flowers bloom, of course, that drives engagement and activity, but not necessarily effectiveness and the benefits that we ultimately want to see from general purpose technologies. So then, trying to be thoughtful and saying, look, this is going to impact ultimately everything that a university does and how we interact. We started to organize ourselves into work streams where we identified institutional leaders, in the spaces of teaching, in the spaces of research and discovery, patient care, the way that we're interacting with external parties like industry and government agencies. And we said, look, we need groups to take ownership of the topic, continue to facilitate the conversation, create the balance of conversation between opportunity and risks. And what do we mean when we say responsible, ethical, or equitable AI in this context? And so we had ownership of the topic to help navigate and also create the pace around the changes. We also had a dimension that we had to think about in terms of how much of this were we going to build our own things on top of tools like that Google was offering or OpenAI was offering or Microsoft was offering, and how much of it will we go to the market and buy? Looking at when we buy things, we also have lots of other processes that kick into place. The other dimension that you learn when you talk to historical economists is that, this journey starts with, let me figure out how to make myself a little bit more productive in what I do, save a little time, do a little better job, create a little better output. And those are the productivity hacks. Then as I get more comfortable with that, and I'm comfortable to talk about it with my colleagues, we then start to look at how do we redesign the processes of the workflows of the work that we do here. And that is not as much about the technology at that point as it is about processes, organizational changes in roles and responsibilities. And we have those examples now that we have walked through as an organization, we've learned from, and we're now sharing. And of course, when you go to the startup community, you get kind of the blank piece of paper opportunity, which is how could you redesign this? And I'll use the example of, if you were a manufacturer, when electricity came, your existing factories, you put the wires on the wall and took it all the way around so you could enhance the number of hours that you had the workers in the factory. But when you built a new factory, you plumbed electricity right into the new building structure. This is what we see going on with, let's say, the startup companies who have a chance to use these technologies from their onset. Next slide, please. So then how do you take this framework and then make it something that you plumb into the way the organization will work? The technology is not the hardest part. We have some things that we have been working on over the last 18 months that have, quote unquote, intellectual property opportunities. They go to a unit of our campus called Applied Innovation, where that's the processes that we have to kind of, work on those IPs, figure out if there's licensing or commercialization opportunities. The rest kind of come into my bucket. And we started to say, how do we really think about making sure everyone has an opportunity to play? And that's where .GPT as a playground for people to feel safe, to start to experience and learn what these tools means and what they might mean to them. We kicked off a program called Work Reimagined, where basically it's like, how do we reimagine the work that we do at an institution where we're constantly have to figure out how to deliver the services that we deliver with more, with less and less money coming to the institution. And we run campaigns to be able to, like we call them innovation campaigns, to encourage people to bring forward their ideas on how we could use AI tools to be able to, quote unquote, do work differently than we have in the past. We took the best of the best stories and we started to do storytelling, because a huge part of getting the next person to say, I'm willing to start using these things, is to hear from a trusted colleague that it's safe and it's made a difference for them, not from listening to someone like me. So Digital Discoveries was about storytelling. We took the best practices and successes and we gave them a forum to share with the rest of the institutions and put it in a library so people can consume it at their own leisure and pace. We invested into upskilling platforms, which is people can, I know one of the earlier speakers was talking about training programs. Well, I think there's two types of training programs. There's self-paced programs, which we use a platform called Udemy, which is a competitor to Coursera, in which now any employee, which includes our student populations, have the opportunity to take a learning path to learn about AI tools. This is part of the investigation. It could wrap your head around it from an intellectual perspective. And then you can get into the GPT sandbox, protected sandbox, to be able to start playing with it and actually get your own experiences with it. Right. So this is part of how we're upskilling everyone. And then with our students, because we believe our students, number one, they are playing with these at higher rates than our employees, but they have their own concerns and fears around them. So while they adopt them more quickly, there's a lot of anxiety that comes along with that. One, in terms of the whether academic dishonesty will come into play if it's not clear how they're allowed or not allowed to use it. But they're also thinking about it from the standpoint of the types of jobs that I thought I was going to get versus the types of jobs that will be available to me in my career because this new technology is becoming so powerful and pervasive. How is this going to affect me over the course of my adult life? And so we are now running challenges with them that allow them to innovate and bring their solutions to support their own student experience, as one example. And in this fall, we're going to run, a very comprehensive forum where we're not going to just repeat these kind of campaigns and innovation challenges, but really bring together the business community, community leaders in Orange County, as well as the members of our community, and saying, how do we make sense of AI? How do we give each person an opportunity to engage in a conversation, whether it's around the opportunity side or the potential risks and downsides? And what does we mean when we say responsible AI or ethical AI? We want people to have their own experiences and voices in those conversations, because we believe at the end of the day, everyone needs to have those experiences, because they're going to navigate their lives going forward with these tools as part of one of the choices that they may get to be able to advance their careers, right? Change the way that they interact with family members. And so we want everyone to have their own working understanding. And as I like to say to people, AI is not taking your job, but the person who knows how to use these tools more effectively may be the one to take your job. And at one point, AI may be in a position to do the job you have today. So what we want to prepare you for is, what's the next job that you're going to have where you're going to use AI because of the need to have human expertise wrapped around these tools. So I think I'll leave my comments there and open it for questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Beyer.
Thank you. Thank you for the testimony. It was really, really important. And I want to go back and focus on one point that you made, which is the story you were telling was about electricity and factories. Mm-hmm. And there are a series of experts from the University of Toronto who wrote a book called Prediction, which I think was 2021. It was thought to be the most cutting edge assessment of artificial intelligence. They came out with a new book in 2024 saying, we got a bunch of stuff wrong. And the key point that they made, which I think you made very eloquently, and the book is Power and Prediction, was that the productivity changes aren't from the application of a single tool. It isn't artificial intelligence that's going to produce productivity changes. Rather, it's people rethinking, reimagining the how to conceptualize the processes, the work, the end product, using the tool. And so I think what you've described for UC-Irvine is great. I wish I was a student there. But how do we take that fundamental insight and implement it in state government?
Yeah.
You have a manageable population. You have a hierarchical management structure. you work for the UC Regents. State government's a pretty diverse, complicated place. There are all sorts of factors. How do you get tens of thousands of employees in widely different disciplines and tasks to understand AI isn't a thing? It isn't like figuring out how to use Microsoft Word, but rather it is the beginning of a mindset change about reimagination of the tasks. And first, to demythologize it, take away the fear, but also think about how to integrate it within a different way of thinking about things. And in our last hearing, when we were talking about food insecurity, it was very clear that there were ways in which food insecurity could be a great model for thinking about how to make it easier for people to become legitimately eligible and get the services delivered. So if you put AI on top of all existing government services, we're not going to become more productive. We may become sclerotic or confused. So take the lessons that you've outlined. How do we as a commission recommend state government thinking the same way?
Yeah, so I think my chancellor might differ in opinion about whether we're a hierarchical structure or whether we're just a smaller microcosm of state government in terms of, he calls himself more a mayor than a CEO. But I think the point is well taken. And in our strategy, I think we're recognizing that at the beginning, this is an individual journey. And the comment was made earlier, try to meet people where they're at and respect where they're at. And what you want to do is move them along that journey. So how do you give them an on-ramp from where they're at and allow them to move at the pace that they're going to move? In doing that, that's why we give them their own playground. We give them the chance to kind of get, upskilling, from a classroom perspective, from a platform perspective like Udemy, or get into a classroom and do those types of things. So we're trying to give everyone understand this, like, it would be incredible. It'd be impossible to meet someone today and saying, well, I've never actually used the internet. I have friends who've used it. Is it really required for the job? Right. But there was a time when that wasn't a ridiculous statement. Right? Most of us probably could recall back to that day. So I think when you talk about, what the state needs to be doing for the tens of thousands of employees is give them their on-ramps, give them their access to content, give them their playgrounds, and then, create a culture where people who have ideas can start acting on them. And then a process by which taking the better ideas or the more scalable ideas and pipeline them into formalized programs, right? Because you want to let 1,000 flowers bloom. You want a culture of continuous improvement. That's why we're doing what we do, is we strive for a culture of continuous improvement where everyone is coming in trying to say, if I could make my world 1% better for the students, the collective of that is a transformed experience for our students. So you want to give people those types of on-ramps. I want to share one kind of recent study and statistic about work. Okay, so what we're finding when we integrate these tools into different types of workforces and we study the productivity gains, okay, it doesn't really help the expert in the field, right? But it takes the average worker and makes them above average by anywhere from 6 to 12% better than what they were, depending on the type of work that they do. But the really insightful one, which comes back to thinking about organizations, is it takes the time to get a new employee to that median performance level, and it cuts it in half. And that's a profound thing when you think about turnover levels, growth strategies for organizations, is that these tools are tremendous accelerators to how work gets done. As well as, and I think in the case of government, because I see this also here, is that there's a lot of people who manually provide answers to different stakeholders who ask for information, what's the proper place to go. How often do they get that accurate, or how often do they get a partially accurate question? And I think tools like AI can give people accurate answers more consistently. And I think that needs to be a goal in public serving organizations like government, like universities.
So just to ask you to detail a little bit, much of the state workforce is unionized, and this area could ultimately be the subject of collective bargaining. So, but I want you to focus on the boundaries of the sandbox. That is, how do you create a safe place that actually has boundaries? that are specified so that there's room for experimentation, some measure of accountability, but a lot of safety. And that's a concept that's very common in academia. How do you create a culture in state government with a unionized workforce where workers are protected by union contracts, and yet they feel safe in experimentation?
Yeah, so I mean that's a really difficult question, right? Let's talk a little bit about, like, how did we create that safe boundary, right? So, the what we explained to people was, look, you can engage with these tools, and the data that you put in, it doesn't go out, and Google doesn't get it, OpenAI doesn't get it, right? So if you put it in here, if you put your syllabus and your course materials in here, you can play with this thing and figure out if you can, create a tutor bot, and you don't have to worry about you've lost your intellectual property as a faculty member that you've worked on for 20 years, right? So that made people feel a lot safer about engaging with the tools. I think when it comes to kind of union workers and how do you build that continuous culture, I don't think we're talking about technology at that point. I think we're talking about how do we create an engaged workforce who's aligned to deliver a better service to whoever the end customer is. And again, this is where at the end of the day, these tools are not going to fix the people challenges that we have in our organization. But they are, for those that lean in and try to use them, are going to give people opportunities to say, we could do this differently. I mean, at some people, I'm like, look, if you can figure out a way to do your 40-hour-a-week job in 28 hours and you want to spend more time going and seeing your kids' soccer games, I'm all behind you on that. Because I think what people want is to not feel overwhelmed and feel like they can balance their work life and the rest of their life. And if this tool helps them do that, I think that's a heck of an incentive, whether you're unionized or not.
Thank you.
Thank you. I need to be mindful of the time. I see Commissioner Johnson is unmuted, which suggests to me that he's got something he wants to do.
I don't. I just forgot to review myself. Sorry about that.
Well, in that case, never mind. All right. I want to thank you, Mr. Andriola, for your presentation. I think you've given us some insight with your experience in working in a large institution and how to make people feel comfortable with what is a new technology so that they embrace it and appreciate how it can be useful to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Back to Daniel.
All right. Our final witness is California State Senator Ben Allen. Senator Allen represents the 24th Senate District, covering the West Side, Hollywood, South Bay, and Santa Monica Mountain communities of Los Angeles County. He was first elected in 2014 and is now serving his third term in the state Senate. Senator Allen chairs the Senate's Environmental Quality Committee and co-chairs the legislature's Environmental Caucus, is a member of the Legislative Jewish Caucus, chairs the legislature's Joint Committee on the Arts, and the Senate Select Committee on Aerospace and Defense. He previously served as chair of the Education Committee from 2017 to 2019, and was chair of the Elections and Constitutional Amendments Committee in 2015 to 2016. Senator Allen, you may begin your testimony.
Well, good to see all of you on here, and so many good friends on the commission, and a lot of former elected officials. So maybe there's a future for me one day. I want to just thank you for giving me this opportunity to just speak a little bit about some of the work that I've gotten involved with and some of what my team sees as opportunities for the use of technological tools such as AI in state government, provided that we assure that we have appropriate safeguards. And in the legislature, as you all know, we often pass bills trying to create new programs that serve our communities that we think will make a difference. But so many of the programs end up failing to realize their full potential to help those who need it most because of barriers to entry, particularly for low-income Californians. So we know that the low-income Californians, the ones who are eligible for these services, end up having all these extra challenges associated with affording these services. And yet we still see under-enrollment in so many of the core programs that were meant to assist addressing this very problem. There was a report that came out from the LAO a few years ago that said that I think only about 40% of eligible California families are enrolled in Lifeline, for example, which is the state's program that provides discounts to low-income households for home phone and cell phone services. So this we set up this program. We think it's going to create all this affordability, and now literally less than half of those eligible, and we're talking about people who are pretty low income, are actually getting the discounts. Another report from the affordability report from the CPUC from 2023 indicated that CARE, which is one of the state's programs that provides electric and gas bill discounts, has very high enrollment rates, over 90%. But but one thing that they found is that there's a lot of geographic variability. So in places like Placer, Nevada, Sierra counties, but also Central and Southeast LA County, including some areas in my district, some of the participation was as low as 20 to 40%. CalFresh, I think it's about 77% of eligible are enrolled, but that goes as low as 40% in many counties. CalWorks, I think it's 60% of eligible families are enrolled. Nationally, while over 30% of Medicare beneficiaries would be eligible for at least 7 different safety net programs such as SNAP or Lifeline, 40% were enrolled in only one program. So there's a lot of really great resources out there that low-income people are simply not accessing. And if you think about all of that, I mean, the people who are eligible for these programs are really struggling. And think about the lost opportunities, what that means for their family, what that means in terms of expendable income and what they're able to spend on their kids. I mean, it's a real problem that we have on our hands. So, I know that there's been all sorts of studies on this. I mean, what are some of the barriers? I mean, lack of awareness about the program, administrative burden to apply, widely varying and confusing eligibility requirements, limited availability sometimes. There's issues of stigma associated with receiving benefits. There's some language and technology barriers and more. As was mentioned, there are some people that are still really struggling with basic access to technology. So, this is why we ended up introducing a bill this year, SB 1480, which would have utilized cross-sharing of consumer of customer data for concurrent enrollment in electric, gas, telecom, and water utility programs. The idea being that why should we force low-income people to fill out separate forms when they're effectively showing eligibility based on the same exact criteria for all their different utilities? Now, it creates some administrative burden to do that on our end, on the government's end. I mean, and it got me thinking that technological tools such as AI, really do potentially present some really exciting opportunities to help us better serve communities, by making it easier for government to interact with regular Californians if it's done right. And we certainly see some exciting examples that are arising across the country. There was an article in the American Journal of Managed Care that found that application assistance and simplification led to dramatically higher rates of enrollment and approval for safety net programs that people were applying to. Our own state's low-income oversight board put out a report last year recommending a series of changes to the state's regulated energy and water and telecoms programs to increase enrollment. And among the proposals are the idea that we should increase targeted marketing and outreach to potentially eligible customers, that we should develop a concurrent enrollment program, kind of similar to what I was working on for electric, gas, water, and telecom income eligible programs, and that we really ought to capitalize on technology to streamline the process. And there's this nonprofit group, Code for America, that many of you are familiar with, that partnered with the Department of Social Services to overhaul California's SNAP program and then the application for SNAP by integrating human-centered design practices into a public interface in the enrollment system. Once again, these are versions of AI that just make it easier for for someone to interact with the system, and make it much more likely that they're going to submit a successful application that it will be approved. Now Code for America helped to design the interface Get CalFresh. It's now the only statewide access point for CalFresh, and it's reduced the enrollment process for CalFresh down to 12-minute online process from what used to be this ridiculous multiple phone call, multiple visits to county offices. And we heard some horror stories from people as to accessing CalFresh. And now we have this AI tool that is now making it easier for people to access CalFresh. You know, Assist Hub is another nonprofit group, kind of similar to Code for America. They're developing an online resource to help Californians determine which benefit programs that they qualify for. It's a sort of a one-stop shop that you can go to find out where you qualify. So, you know, I mean, I just think in general, you know, I know so many of you are aware of this, but I as I got involved with this bill, I really, you know, came to be so aware of this growing recognition and the growing work that's underway that seeks to streamline access to social safety net programs. And it's a really it's a real need for helping our most vulnerable Californians access the programs that we have made available to them. I mean, and if you think about the cost of lack of access, right? I mean, the economic cost of childhood poverty, it's $1 trillion annually in the United States, right? I mean, you know, I don't mean to say that putting in place these kinds of AI tools to help people access applications are going to fix all the systemic issues underlying, all the problems associated with accessing benefits. But we do, the evidence that I've been seeing certainly suggests that there's some real opportunities to increasing access and uptake for social safety net programs through AI. Through streamlining applications, parsing complicated eligibility rules, providing 24/7 application guidance, supporting concurrent enrollment processes, reducing paperwork, and more. So now that's all incredibly exciting, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to do more. And I know that's what you're going to be looking at with your report. I also think, of course, we know that there are, that there's more to this than just putting in place an AI system and walking away, right? I mean, you know, the adoption of this kind of new technology needs to be accompanied by other efforts to address intentionally burdensome or overly burdensome enrollment processes, understaffed benefit offices, lack of funding, technology-driven job loss, ingrained stigma about receiving benefits. I mean, all those continue to be issues that need to be kind of thought about. And of course, we also need to make sure that AI isn't trained on historically biased sources that will reproduce and propagate misleading information, which has been a problem that we've had with AI, in other areas of work. So anyhow, I wanted to just bring these issues forward. That were some learnings that we had in our office as we were working on the bill, and just put them in front of the commission for your consideration and thought. I really do think there's some opportunity for the use of AI when we're helping people access their much needed government benefits.
Thank you, Senator. This is Pedro. So the SB 1480 that had to do with the Low Income Oversight Board, correct?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so what did, and I'll get to you, Vice Chair Cannella.
No, I refuse any questions from Cannella.
Smart.
So your bill would have done what? Can you help us understand that? So I don't know.
Yeah. So it would have basically put in place a program to utilize a cross sharing of customer data for concurrent enrollment in the different utilities, so that there'd be greater coordination between electric, gas, telecom, water utilities, so that someone wouldn't have to apply 4 different applications for the low income programs with all the different utilities.
Right. And so it got held in suspense because it must add some costs.
Yeah.
So what did the analysis say with respect to how much they thought that was going to cost?
Oh God.
Okay.
On here, I don't remember. I mean, they were holding all sorts of stuff. I mean, just terrible budget year. I don't remember, Pedro. I'll go back and look.
No, that's okay. I mean, we can find that, but I do think sometimes what happens in the process is we don't accurately measure the benefit.
Yeah. The
benefit at the point that you made with respect to families who are struggling, and how significant what would appear to some people to be a relatively minor amount, the tremendous difference that can make in people's lives, even in so much as providing some security and stability for them.
Yeah.
And let's hope that Senator Cannella has got a question that we can all embrace, followed by Commissioner.
It's doubtful, but we'll see.
Yeah, very doubtful, right? Well, it's good to see you, first of all, Senator Allen. Thanks for being a part of our meeting here. think you add some great perspective. And I think you already answered my question when you were talking about what the bill did and what we can do as Californians to help the most needy. I just thought, well, who could possibly be opposed to this? I mean, this is such a great idea if AI could kind of come in and help these folks that are really struggling. But then you answered the question that it's about money, which is interesting. I understand financial times, but these are programs that are already available, right? So right. It's unfortunate that, again, I understand how it works, but it's just unfortunate that we can get more people on these programs for help, but then we reject it because of the price tag. So knowing you, I'm sure you're going to continue to push this. And I think as Californians, we certainly need to prioritize where our money goes, and providing more assistance to people that are struggling, I think is a well use of funds. So thanks for being here.
Thank you, Senator.
Commissioner Hernandez.
Senator, good to see you. Thank you for being here. First, the quota for attorneys from LA has been met, so you're probably going to have to wait a long time to be on this commission.
Oh, okay. All right.
So, but we can talk about that.
All right.
But secondly, I mean, in terms of your leadership, I mean, and I did track the legislation, and today's conversation, part of it was how do we train or best train or oversee the training in terms of government entities in learning AI. And what I saw is that, at least at the Public Utilities Commission, there was just a lack of understanding in terms of what you were trying to do. Some of the folks didn't even know what autofill was in terms of just automatically filling the application. And so imagine getting to the level of better understanding AI. But I do think that with the information that's going to come out in the next couple of months from this commission, it'll really help with that discourse. One thing that the commissioners are looking at this time are benefits in terms of low-income populations, in terms of food services, and possibly other sectors as well. So your efforts are, again, a visionary in terms of going in the right direction and some of the things that we're going to be looking at. So thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner.
Let me take a look at fellow commissioners. I see David Byer is unmuted and his hand is up.
Thank you, Senator. Your focus on human beings and their needs is welcome. Oftentimes we get caught up in policy and principles and ignore the fact that this has a dramatic effect on people's lives. I don't want to go down the route of either praising or criticizing Senator Wiener and his bill or the bills of your colleagues. Just one suggestion and thing to urge you to think about as you and your colleagues proceed, and referencing Commissioner Johnson's comments earlier. Tech companies have been critical of what they perceive as excess regulation. They do provide compute to government and academic institutions, perhaps as a set aside. They should focus on making sure that their products are useful in the way that you and your legislation contemplate as a contribution to the advance of society in a kind of principled way. Government is not the only solution to social services for the vulnerable, but tech companies themselves can do that as they have done in electric utilities and telephone.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep, I don't disagree. You're right.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Let me take a look. Any other commissioners? Commissioner Aroner.
Yeah.
Very good.
I was going to say good morning, Senator, but it's actually 1 minute to now. Right? It's good afternoon. I wanted to follow up on this, particularly because Commissioner Byer was talking about the fact that what this is really about is about people. And it's about more than just the state employees, right? Because we have 250,000, if I'm not mistaken, state employees. That's why I thought the previous testifiers were really interesting, because when you talk about how do you do the training across the board, right, with 250,000 employees, and that doesn't include the university system. University system, our higher ed is another 250, I think. And so, and they all are in silos, rightfully or wrongly, doesn't really matter. They're in silos. They have a hard time talking to each other. And so how we could come up with common training for them. But the other population that I think you're specifically talking about is the consumers.
Right.
And so how do you know? It's not just a question of training our staff, our state workers, and county workers and city workers. I mean, there's many more jurisdictions here, even though we're just focused on the state. But also in looking at how valuable is AI in regards to ensuring that our consumers get the best service possible. I remember way back, I think Governor Schwarzenegger was governor when I got involved in this whole idea about how do we, the applications for public assistance, whether it is TANF or it is Medicaid or it is food stamps or it is WIC, all of those kinds of programs that very often impact the same people, right, numerous times, and yet they have to file 5 applications. And at one point, folks were beginning to say, wait a minute, can't we come up with common applications? And to this date, we do not have common applications, right? Literally, the people that administer both TANF and food stamps and Medicaid are all the same people. It's the same eligibility worker that makes you, right, helps you become eligible. But he or she is looking at a set of forms very often, or really not even the set of forms, a set of eligibility factors that could be different from program to program. Some of that we might not be able to control at the state level because the feds actually are the ones that control very often, certainly for food stamps, they control the entire program. All we do, the stamps themselves are federally funded. It's the administration of food stamps or SNAP that the state has to partake in, right, probably financially. And so trying to figure some of this out, as I think about it, if we could have the consumers at the table sometimes to be able to help us figure out what are their needs, because that might be a really interesting way of simplifying some of this, as opposed to when we hand things like this over to government and even large corporations, right? Things for some reason get very complex when really what we're looking for is nothing very difficult to do, but it becomes very complex because of the way all of these systems work or don't work together. So just wanted to point that out.
Yep. Yeah, that's precisely what we've been trying to get at here. And of course, it's hard enough for people with law degrees to fill out half of the forms that we're asked to fill out, and you're asking, folks who busy, working people. I mean, it's a crazy system we have, and to have people effectively just have to fill in the same information in slightly different forms over and over and over again, just to access basic services that we're trying to get out to people to help them. It's no way to win a railroad.
Well, thank you. I think we're all grateful for your service and the focus that you have in your work, and you're well known for that. And I want to thank Commissioner Hernandez for assisting to get you before the commission.
Thank you, and thank you for the work that you do. I mean, the commission does really important work in helping to. There's not enough of these opportunities for really thoughtful deep dives into big policy questions, and I continue whenever I come before the commission, I continue to be impressed and grateful for the work you do, and you really do help to inform a lot of the policy debates that happen in the Capitol. And I just want to thank you all for the work and patience and expertise you all bring.
Thank you very much, Senator. I think that concludes our witnesses. Let me turn this over to back to Ethan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So at this point, we will move into the public comment portion of the agenda, and we will start, if possible, for members of the public online. We will start with comments about AI and state government. If there are any people wishing to make public comment about that topic, you can raise your hand now, and then we will try to take public comment on other topics in just a moment. The directions to make public comment are online. If you've joined by Zoom, please use the raised hand function. That is by far the best way to let us know you wish to make public comment. If you've joined via phone, you can send an email to littlehoover@lhc.ca.gov. Include your phone number so we know who to unmute. In keeping with the Commission's traditional practice, public comment is limited to 3 minutes per commenter. Please stick to that time limit, 3 minutes per commenter. Commissioners will be able to hear you but not see you when you make public comment. So again, if possible, we'll first take public comment from people who wish to make comment about artificial intelligence, if there are any, and then we'll move on to comment about the business meeting agenda items. So at this point, let me try to look and see if we have any raised hands among attendees. I believe there is one. So we will start with Pat Brown. Shara, if you can unmute Pat Brown.
Pat Brown now has the ability to hit unmute.
I'm unmuted, I believe.
You are.
Thank you. I'm still trying to formulate this question. I've been following this episode and the previous presentation on AI, and I still have questions on food waste and how to get it moved before it spoils so that we can give it to animals after it has been deemed not good for people. I'd be curious on what your commission thinks on that. If you need me to give a little bit more background, I can do that. But I have talked with Daniel quite a bit on this, and I'm just really curious on where AI can be used on this.
Well, Ms. Brown, this is really your time to make public comment. You have about 2.5 more minutes. So if you'd like to give us more background, please feel free. We can discuss with you later after the meeting. But feel free if you'd like to provide more background.
Part of the problem I'm seeing is that we're not including animal models within our food waste systems. And I think the animal models are going to be the default situation for a lot of producers other than the centralized processes we have right now. And I'm not seeing that conversation put into them. And there's a time gap that is within when the food is produced as to, and what type it is to when it can be gotten to the animals. So like I said, I'm still trying to formulate this. This is not very clear. So I can withdraw my comments if you like, and we can talk offline.
That's fine. Thank you very much, Ms. Brown. So I believe there are no other hands raised right now with regard to artificial intelligence. So for members of the public, we'll now move into the business meeting portion of the agenda, and we'll take public comment on any other topic, including the 2 business meeting items on the agenda, which are the topic selection for future studies by the Commission and consideration of a draft letter regarding homeowners insurance. So if you wish to make public comment on anything else, please go ahead and raise your hand now or email us at littlehoover@lhc.ca.gov. Shara, if you can please recognize the first person.
Yes, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right. P. Perot, you now have the ability to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. It's Paula Perotti. Good afternoon. I'm Paula Perotti, Mayor of Goleta, California. So on behalf of Goleta City Council, I sent a letter to the Little Hoover Commission on March 27th, 2024, asking you to investigate California's revenue neutrality, or RNA. That was passed in 1992 and codified by the Cortez-Knox-Hertzberg Act of 2000. Before 1992, newly formed cities did not have to compensate counties for the privilege of becoming a city. Simply put, California's laws on city formations are unfair and have a chilling effect the RNA provision has had on new incorporations. Following its 1992 passage, only 15 cities have incorporated and only 1 in the last 13 years. It is in California's interest to enable residents to form new cities, to exercise local control and local issues. Conceptually, revenue neutrality is not objectionable. It's an attempt to ensure fiscal neutrality to the county when a city incorporates. But in application, RNA stands as a clear barrier to would-be cities. The statute fails to recognize an imbalanced bargaining table, as counties have essential veto power on incorporation, nor does it consider that changes in both our laws and our society will potentially bring dramatic reduction in city revenue. And as examples, since RNA was enacted, Proposition 218 and 26 amended California's constitution to restrict city revenue raising abilities. State redevelopment funds were eliminated, and technology and a worldwide pandemic have reduced city revenues from local stores. Many of the cities incorporated since 1992 were forced to negotiate RNA that require transferring a portion of their primary taxes, property tax, sales tax, and/or TOT, for 25 to 30 years. Goleta's RNA with Santa Barbara County is worse, requiring that 50% of our property tax and 30% of our sales tax goes to the county in perpetuity. We believe other would-be cities have taken note of Goleta's RNA, and that's why only 6 California cities have incorporated since Goleta. So we make 2 requests. One, that the commission make recommendations requiring Santa Barbara County to renegotiate our revenue neutrality agreement so that Goleta taxes are not taken in perpetuity. And state action is needed for Santa Barbara County to agree to fair changes. And 2, that the commission make recommendations requesting that legislation amend the revenue neutrality provision of the Cortez-Knox-Hertzberg Act so that the unincorporated areas are not encumbered as happened to Goleta. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mayor. And I might mention for the commissioner's information, Mayor Perotti's letter is at page 43 of your packet for this meeting. Sheriff, you can identify the next speaker, please.
The next speaker will be Scott. Scott, you now have the ability to unmute yourself.
I believe
Scott,
I'm unmuted.
You are. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Executive Director and the Commission for allowing me to speak. My name is Scott Richmond. I'm the immediate past president of the Association of California State Employees with Disabilities, and I'm sitting in for our current president, Bobby Dutta, who unfortunately had some work commitments with his agency and wasn't able to represent us today. In your packet, I believe you have Bobby's letter, though, requesting that the commission look into an issue that has deeply concerned us for quite a while, and that is the steady and somewhat precipitous decline in the representation levels of people with disabilities in the California State Civil Service. There have been many thoughts and ideas put forward in a speculatory way about the possible reasons and causes for the decline. But quite honestly, I don't think anybody has a firm handle on exactly what is going on. So that really persuaded Bobby to put this question before the commission, and hopefully the commission will take a look at it and maybe help us get to the bottom of it. We lack the resources to do this ourselves, but as an interested party, we're really, really hopeful that we can get some identification as to the reason or reasons why these numbers have continued to fall over the last 6.5 years. We realize that you have a number of very worthwhile proposals that you'll be considering today, and ours is just one. But we strongly believe that the commission may be the one entity that has the resources, the expertise, and the objectivity to hopefully help us get to the bottom of this question. So I'll just conclude my remarks by thanking you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dutta, or Mr. Richmond, I apologize. Mr. Dutta's letter, Commissioners, is at page 48 of your packet. If we have any other members of the public wishing to make public comment, please raise your hand immediately. We have just checked emails and we have no emails, and I see no hands going up. So I believe, that is the end of Mr. Richmond's 3 minutes. So I believe, Mr. Chairman, we can close out the public comment session and then move into the second agenda item on the business meeting, which is topic selection, what a couple of the commenters just mentioned. We have staff bandwidth to add a new study topic at this point. The meeting schedule and future topics document begins on page 29 of your packet. I would point commissioners to page 31, where there is a list of 6 recent public requests, including those which were just mentioned by public commenters. There are also a couple from the legislature. Starting on page 32, there's a list of 4 staff-generated ideas. Starting on page 33, there's a list of pre-existing proposals. Those are ideas that have been previously considered by the commission, but they're obviously still very much on the table. Following all that information in the packet are the supporting documents. From page 36 to 38 is an expanded memo outlining a proposal for a series of studies on governmental efficiency that Tamara and I developed. Pages 39 to 51 are letters related to public requests, including those from the legislature. Pages 53 to 69 are 2 previously distributed brief scoping memos on foster care and youth suicide. So there is a great deal of material, and I apologize for that, but I think much of that relates to the relatively high number of public requests we have had, which I think speaks well of the commission's profile. So happy to answer any questions. As the commission knows, the list is provided as a source of ideas, but it's not exhaustive. You all are free to obviously choose something that is not on this list if you wish. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll just turn it back over to you for commission discussion.
Yeah, let's, and I'll just turn this over to the commission to see if anybody has a preference or a particular topic that they'd like to open up for discussion. And I see a number of hands. I think Commissioner Sidley, followed by Commissioner Hernandez.
So thank you, Pedro. Good afternoon, everybody. So I was just, and it may very well fall into some of what Tamar and Ethan had scoped out. I think having attended a number of recent meetings with some foundations and public-private entities, there were a lot of complaints about how difficult it is to do public-private partnerships in the state and how many obstacles there are to trying to move forward. And I think that it is somewhat, maybe David Byert somewhat works on what you're talking about with AI and bringing the tech industries into those programs. I think it could be an interesting study and very beneficial for the Little Hoover Commission to come to do some hearings on obstacles for public-private partnerships, how we could maybe streamline the government to get past some of those obstacles. And so I put that out there as an idea that we may look at for people's consideration. So thank you.
Of course, thank you. Commissioner Hernandez, followed by Commissioner Byert.
Just if there was more, maybe I'm missing the actual letter, information on the legislature's request on affordability.
The letter is in the packet.
Okay, perfect. Let me take a look at it. And if there was any conversation, and then I'm guessing that Jackson was the lead author, or they were all. Let me take a look at it.
Correct. Commissioner Hernandez, that letter is at page 39 of your packet.
Perfect.
And Assemblymember Jackson was sort of the lead author. His staff contacted us, but the letter was co-signed by Assembly members Lee, Alanis, and Rubio.
Perfect. I see it right now. And then, yeah, okay, thank you so much.
And but wait a minute, but its focus is on affordability of what?
They're talking about, it says here, supply chain, food access, market rate, how, I mean, it's pretty extensive.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, and my reading of it, it's an interesting kind of request because it's essentially a research request. It says, compile a list of studies regarding the causes, effects, and significant rise in the cost of living in California, and then use the studies to develop recommendations as potential solutions to California's affordability crisis, with an emphasis on historically marginalized, disadvantaged, and oppressed populations. If you read the letter, You know, I'm guessing that Ethan has already put in a request for another 7 staff people.
Well, but Pedro, what's interesting about it is that the legislature has it has control over some of that. They could use the California State, the California State Library, the Bureau, and/or the Senate Office of Research for sure to do the first part of it, right?
Right.
But,
no, I agree. I think that there are other entities who are in a better position to harvest, because that's basically what we're doing. What they're asking is for somebody to harvest these studies and put them all in one place.
Right.
Commissioner Beyer.
Thank you. To try and mind meld what we just heard from Commissioner Sidley and Commissioner Hernandez, my suggestion is that we respond to the Assembly people indicating we're open to their idea, but we would like to do what the chair said and ask others to do the research task before we take up what they've proposed. So that we're responsive, but that we don't undertake things that we don't have the resources to conduct. Mm-hmm. And with respect to the, I'll call it the staff recommendation, I'm supportive with the caveat that we can't boil the ocean. As a person who formerly worked for Vice President Gore and reinventing, and I obviously was involved in reinventing government, that was a massive task. It required a staff, I think, 4 times the size of the commission staff, and took 8 years. And it proceeded on an agency by agency basis against a set of principles. So government efficiency is, in my view, probably too large, but I think Commissioner Sidley put her finger on a possible way of using public-private partnerships as a limitation on government efficiency. There may be other case studies within government efficiency that could be undertaken, as opposed to all measures for all times for all subjects on government efficiency that would narrow what the staff proposed. Otherwise, I'm supportive.
Okay. So let's pivot on that one. I think. And Commissioner Hernandez, your hand's up again.
No, just in terms of initiative reform, I know that about 15 years ago, there was, I think, California Forward. I mean, they did a bunch of studies. We were looking at the initiative process. Has this commission looked at the initiative process in the past, or that would be a first time?
I'm going to defer to Tamar, who's been with the commission longer than I have, although to the best of my knowledge, we have not looked at, you're referring now to the request that from a member of the Alameda County Grand Jury that we look at the issue of drafting ballot language for local, who drafts the ballot language for local initiatives? No.
I believe this is the staff on initiative reform.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Sorry, Commissioner, we have a bit of
technical issues here.
Okay,
so I think to answer your question, I don't think we've looked at issues of initiative reform, but I know that there was a period of time with the commission where we were looking periodically at specific initiatives that were passed and sort of reviewing at least a number of those. That was, for example, how we initiated our study on the Mental Health Services Act, which was Proposition 63, I believe. Anyway, it doesn't matter the number. So there was that angle of it. I don't think that we've looked broadly at the initiative process, and perhaps I'll defer to the chairman for his memory as well.
Just to be clear, Commissioner Hernandez, I'll also note, I think you're referring to the item on page 34 of the packet. That's actually, to be perfectly honest, that's been on the list for some time, and I'm not entirely sure where that initially came from. I don't know that that was a staff proposal. It's been on the list for some period of time.
34, page 34.
Page 34. These are the sort of the ideas that have been presented to the commission in the past. For instance, right above initiative reform, they're by alphabetical order, Mr. Chairman. Right above initiative reform is foster care. At the top of the page is the fiscal system.
Yeah, I see it. I seem to remember that we had some discussion about the initiative process. I mean, Commissioner Garcetti, I think, had some points that he raised with respect to that, and it was all surrounding what was going on with the recall, right? We discussed recall and how that thing is structured, but we never really got into the initiative
or the referendum. We just did recall, I think.
Yeah,
that is correct, Mr. Chairman. We did a full report on the recall.
Yeah, right.
System for state officials, but we did not really look at in any depth at either initiatives or referenda.
Right.
Commissioner Aaron is correct.
Okay. Anybody got something else, or you want to pursue? Is there a way to put together? Well, look, it seems to me part of what we are hearing from people. When you talk about public-private partnership, does that touch upon our conversation about computing for the state with AI? And maybe not. I think, Commissioner Sidley, you've got a little bit, maybe you can flesh that out a little bit more for us?
Certainly. So it actually came up in a conversation with some people who are with the Milken Institute, a couple other organizations, and it really, they wanted to partner with the state for clean energy. And there are a number of obstacles to trying to partner with the state on, whether or not it's the hydrogen hub or whether or not we're putting in new charging systems, et cetera, et cetera. And there's also some obstacles with the federal government and public-private, like what it really comes down to is how can we all partner together to get grants and to get more grants into the state from the various organizations. And so you need support from the private sector, and you need the California piece, and you need the federal piece. But since we're focused on California, it really is what are obstacles that are in the way so that some of these foundations, organizations can't participate. And then while I was saying this, it's very much where Commissioner Beyer is talking about how some of the tech companies do want to help the state with some various computing or AI and things like that, but they also have obstacles. And so candidly, I don't know what the obstacles are, which is why I was saying maybe we should look into it. I do know that people do complain that California is difficult. And so there is a need for money from all of these different entities. So if we can figure out a way, if the Little Hoover Commission can be supportive at looking at how can we come up with a path or some ideas to make it easier, more streamlined so that California can benefit from government grants, how we can benefit from these private sector, and how we can also multiply dollars, because often you need to have matching funds. And can those matching funds actually come from a private entity, or must it come from a city? And so I think that we are in a unique position to try to look at that, hear what people are experiencing as obstacles, to getting federal grants, state grants, et cetera, and then maybe trying to come up with some ideas and some suggestions to move forward. So that's really the concept. It has not, I haven't talked about it with Ethan. I haven't fleshed it out at all. I have just received participating in a couple conferences, Global Green, and certainly David Abel's conference. I did hear a lot of people who were struggling with how can we put our money in and get our money multiplied. So that's where this comes from.
David Byers got his hand up, and I see Dion is unmuted. So David?
Well, just a practical suggestion, perhaps on the basis of what's been said and what Commissioner Aaroner and others are going to say, if staff essentially redid their proposal as a scoping memo to narrow it to some specific tasks, I think we'd be better served in terms of the metes and bounds of a study, and that way we might be broader than what Commissioner Sidley says, but not as broad as what the staff proposed.
Dion?
So in listening to Jana, one thought I had was, because it appears that higher education has figured this out. Certainly the University of California and its 10 campuses have figured this out, because they have lots of public-private partnerships. They spin off things all the time, as you know, particularly in the tech world and in biotech and all of that. Might be worth it to look at that as a model. I had an experience about this just a couple of years ago, where a foundation wanted to pay for something to happen, right? And they did it, but they had to go through a rigmarole with the governor's office, because it's interesting. You just can't donate money to the state of California. You can pay your taxes, everybody, and if you want to pay over and above what you're supposed to pay, that's fine. But if you say to them, I have $2 million and I would like to give it to the state for the purposes of doing such and such, because it will benefit the state and the public in general, it's not an easy thing to do. I don't know if it's a constitutional issue. It's probably some very basic questions, Jana, that need to be answered to start with. Even, what prevents the state of California from accepting private money if it's not through the revenue? It's the tax system. Mm-hmm. And there is something there. And then going from there to looking at what are the things that need to be changed, wherever it is, to allow those kinds of partnerships.
I'm looking at Jose, and he's going to crawl right through the screen.
I've worked with like about 12 different foundations, and mm-hmm. it's not just tax state, it's also FPPC. So anytime you give government money, there's mm-hmm. always the potential for influence. So gotcha. Even if it's a lonely little state agency or so forth, there are rules and people mm-hmm. look at it. And it depends. I mean, of course, all the foundations I work for were amazing, but there's other foundations that might be a little unscrupulous. But I mean, it's just a lot. It's a lot. I mean, it definitely is something to look at, but it's not as easy as, the tax structure. There is this whole FPPC ethics, and it gets mm-hmm. larger. I mean, the easiest thing that I've always recommended is create a nonprofit, and the nonprofit works with the agency, and that's typically what happens. But I'd be happy to take those $2 million, Commissioner Sidley, and work with someone.
Let me go to Ethan. I think he has some thoughts.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I believe that Commissioner Byers sort of offered much of what I was thinking, which is that if it is the will of the Commission to move forward on public-private partnerships, and what are the barriers to creating public-private partnerships, as Commissioner Sidley has suggested, we might want to do a scoping memo and come back to the Commission with a bit more detail on that. We could come back at the August meeting, which will be held by Zoom, and present the scoping memo and see then if the Commission wants to move forward. In conjunction with that, we can revise the staff proposal on the governmental efficiency suggestion. The concept which we wanted to offer, and which I'm not sure came through in our memo sufficiently, was as a series of limited studies, not attempting to boil the ocean, to borrow Commissioner Byers' phrase, but taking off very small pieces and doing them in sequence over time. So the public-private partnership could be a part of that, or it could be its own freestanding thing. But I wonder if it might be beneficial for us to provide a scoping memo, at least on the public-private partnerships, with more details, and come back to the Commission with that memo in August, and perhaps a revised version of our own efficiency study, if that's what the Commission wishes, but that's up to all of you.
So it would be like making government better would be the umbrella, and then underneath that, you'd have subsets.
Correct. That was the concept that we were going for, and I think that the public-private partnership issue fits into that umbrella, but I do not know a great deal about it, and so I'm not entirely sure.
Mr. Chairman, so let me give you a couple specifics. So at the federal government level, there is the Performance Review Act, I think is the name of it, which requires agencies to submit reports about how they've improved efficiency. There are other tasks that are kind of in that category that I think the staff is talking about. My point was to make it specific enough so that we could make relevant recommendations, but not do everything in it. So I probably misconstrued what Ethan and colleagues wrote up as a series of studies. I wasn't trying to limit it just to the public-private partnership, but rather things of that nature that speak to government efficiency.
Yeah, so it'd be like a theme. Let's do Commissioner Sidley and then Aaroner.
So I just wanted to say I'd be very interested in Jose's input on this idea that I'm talking about, because you deal with it as part of your world. I just heard about it when I was a speaker at this conference, and people were complaining, and I thought, wow, this might be an interesting study. So I want to make sure that you who deal in this area think that it is really as big a problem as I was hearing as I'm suggesting this as a potential. And it may be too narrow for us, or may not be as much of a problem, but certainly I heard a number of complaints, and knowing where our budget is and knowing what's going on, I thought it might be something that we could be helpful in looking at. So, but I completely want to hear from Jose and his experience to make sure that I'm sort of on the right track here. So thanks.
And I'm happy to work, Ethan, with staff in a scoping memo. I mean, it's a double-edged sword in terms of giving money to the state agencies, but yeah, happy to opine.
Yep. Commissioner Aaroner?
Yeah, the other thought I have, and kind of in following up to Commissioner Byer's thoughts about, this efficiencies and stuff, is, with this particular administration, actually, there have been how many master plans that have been created now? Certainly one in aging, one in developmental disabilities. There's a third. Oh, education. We have a master plan in education, childcare, early childhood development. And whether or not, because their ideas there are actually to lay out a roadmap, right, of things that need to be done in those particular issue areas. And whether or not there's something there in looking at, as you look at efficiencies in a broader sense, to, do they, do those kinds of master plan activities lead to more efficiencies, and more importantly than efficiencies, that they lead actually to some sort of reform, right, which then improves the delivery of services that they are, that they are planning for. So it might be something under that, that same huge, overall thought in regards to efficiencies.
Yeah. So let me turn to Ethan, because we've got one other item, and I'm sure people are going to want to have lunch and do other things. But do you have enough to work with here in terms of the architecture for a scoping memo?
I think so, Mr. Chairman. I think, as I would understand the will of the commission at this time, it would be that we would return in August with a revised revision of our staff proposal for a series of studies on governmental efficiency, more fully scoped with more details. And in particular, this would include an examination of the issue of public-private partnerships and the barriers to those partnerships and efforts to remove those barriers. That would sort of be the first among equals in this potential series of studies. So I think we could return in August with a fully fleshed out scoping memo.
All right. So not seeing any violent opposition, that's the direction that we'll pursue. Thank you. All right. Next item.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next item, the only other item on the business meeting agenda, is consideration of a draft letter regarding homeowners insurance. This issue pertains to a pending trailer bill proposed by Governor Newsom that would streamline the approval process for insurance rate changes. The subcommittee members for that study, Commissioners Sidley and Cannella, have approved a draft recommendation supporting that concept, but because it exists in a trailer bill, the bill may be acted upon before the full homeowners insurance report is released. So accordingly, they asked that we schedule a full commission discussion of a draft letter supporting that trailer bill. You, Mr. Chairman, in turn asked that we also include a brief memo describing the pros and cons of using the trailer bill process for policy legislation, not directly for the budget. So the memo on the trailer bill process begins at page 70 of the packet. The draft letter in support of the governor's trailer bill begins on page 73. And then for additional information, Just by chance, the Sacramento Bee happened to publish a story recently on the use of trailer bills for policy issues. That begins on page 77 of the packet. So with that, Mr. Chairman, again, I'll turn it back over to you for discussion.
Yeah, I just wanted the commission to be aware of the controversy with respect to trailer bills. They're being used to promote policy. The trailer bills weren't initially designed to do that, but more and more they've morphed into a different kind of animal. And as the subcommittee wants to support a trailer bill because it aligns with our recommendations, I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood that there are some folks, including legislators, who aren't terribly enamored with the use of trailer bills to push and promote policy decisions. And so the information is in the packet. You've all had a chance to look at it. That's all I have to say. Commissioner Hernandez.
Just of note, it's interesting the correlation as the legislature started cracking down on gut and amends and they created the 3-day rule, then we saw the increase of trailer bills. I think the legislature has a proclivity to really want to sneak in policy at the last second.
Commissioner Byer.
Well, as a person who recently had a home fire in my own home, I have an acute interest in homeowners insurance.
Yeah.
At first, I'm glad no one was hurt. I'm glad I had insurance, but I have so much more direct human empathy with people who don't have adequate insurance or who've been denied insurance. And regretfully, the necessity is to speed up the rate approval process.
Yeah.
And therefore, I think an exception to whatever policy preference you might have about trailer bills, that this is justified. And then just as an aside, my own experience is it isn't just the availability of insurance. I feel like I've been subjected to so many scam artists in the last 8 days that it makes ambulance chasers look like they have ethics.
Yeah.
Commissioner Aaron.
So I want to speak to both issues, right? So let's do the home insurance, because you all know my saga. You want to hear the result?
Yeah.
The result is that the insurance that I lost was $3,500 a year, and the insurance I am about to write a check for is $10,000. Mm. Okay, and that's using the outside. What are they called? The ones that come from out of state,
right?
Because okay, so nobody would insure from in-state.
Yeah.
Now, in regards to trailer bills, using trailer bills for policy it's nothing new. I think that what's new is I think that Commissioner Hernandez got to a point where because of all the transparency on one side of the legislative process, right? There might be maybe somewhat lack of transparency on the other half, in other words, using gut and amends. But if you're to be honest with you, if you're a skilled legislator or a skilled advocate, you're going to go and use trailer bill language wherever you can. And the reason is, and I think I expressed this at one hearing, I remember talking to one of our advocates who would come in to testify in front of us. To get language into a trailer bill is 3 stops. To get a bill onto the governor's desk is 7 stops. I'm sorry, everybody, if I talk about governmental efficiency, right? It is the most efficient use of people's time to try to use a trailer bill, if possible, right? Most of the time, it has to be, the language that goes in has to be something that's already been discussed in a policy committee, whether the current year, the year before, or whatever, so that it can be justified that, yes, we've heard the policy. But there are other times when, and here's, and in the insurance one, they've had hearings on the insurance issue. And so I'm sure that that's how they're justifying it to themselves, to putting it in, and also based on the timing issue, because the insurance commissioner keeps talking about December. Not that he talks to us, but he talks to the others about December. But the governor and the legislature and the public is demanding something to happen sooner, and the trailer bill is the way to do that. The minute the governor signs it, it becomes law. So I suggest we send a letter.
Yeah, I don't think this requires a motion and a second and a vote. This was an expression of interest by the subcommittee. I just wanted to make sure that all the commissioners understood that there was controversy with respect to this process, so that we don't stagger into it by accident. And so, we've had the conversation. I don't see anybody else objecting to it. And I think, Janice, you want to object?
I'm certainly not objecting, because I am of the subcommittee and making the recommendation that we send it. I am also not opposed, if the committee is more comfortable, to put a footnote at the bottom that the committee is, sorry, Winston, that the committee is taking no position on trailer bills one way or another. We are just supporting this particular legislation. If that makes people feel better, we'll just put a footnote at the bottom, on that note, sort of very simple language, and that does not impact the importance of, I think, us supporting this particular trailer.
I think the issue really is that trailer bills, because they trail the budget, can have more. There could be other things in this particular trailer bill there might be some other things dealing with insurance or whatever, in that part of the code, and that we're not supporting. We aren't involved in whatever other parts there are. It's just that we are supporting this particular language in this particular bill.
Yeah, I think the letter probably says that. I don't know that we need a footnote. I think it's much cleaner the way that it's drafted, and so it is the consensus of the commission that the letter be issued forth.
Mr. Chairman, actually, if I might, with all due respect, suggest that we do call the roll under the revised Bagley-Keene Act with regard to remote meetings. We are supposed to vote by roll call so that members of the public can hear the actual vote. So with all due respect, if I may suggest that we, if I understood, there is effectively a motion that the commission would approve the letter that's on page 73, the draft letter on page 73 of the packet. And if I could, then I will call the roll just to make sure we're legal.
So there was a motion by Commissioner Sidley, seconded by Commissioner Cannella, that the letter be issued.
That was good.
The letter as put forth before be approved. Call the roll, please.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Vice Chairman?
Aye.
Commissioner Aroner?
Aye.
Commissioner Byer?
Aye.
Assembly Member Chen? Commissioner Garcetti?
Aye.
Commissioner Hernandez?
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
Senator Min, Assemblymember Ortega, Commissioner Sidley?
Yes, aye.
And Senator Wilk. The motion carries, Mr. Chairman.
Terrific.
And with that, I think we have completed the agenda, Mr. Chairman.
Right, and before 1 o'clock. So anyway, listen, it was great seeing all of you. David, I think we all feel, have some strong feelings about what happened to you. You seem well, and I think on behalf of the commission, I don't know if there's anything that we can do, but I think I speak for all of us that if there is anything that you think we can do, please feel free to reach out and get a hold of us.
Well, thank you very much. I meant what I said about from a consumer point of view. It's like the Wild West.
Yep.
The night we were away, the night of the fire, scam artists showed up hearing things on a CB radio from the fire department before the flames were out, trying to locate the owner to, basically get paid to put tarp on the roof and, plywood on the windows.
Yeah.
And they were there the next morning when we came back from being away visiting a sick friend, and 10 phone calls, 10 people showing up, banging on your door, all of them fraudulent.
Yeah.
And so I just, my heart breaks for people who are less fortunate, and it makes me unhappy that the Department of Insurance is on occasion not responsive.
Right.
Yeah. No, I know. And looking at the Department of Insurance, I came across a budget item for them, and that was where I learned, I was not aware of this, but the overall amount of premiums, not for homeowners insurance, but for the entire industry that they collect per year is $409 billion through that department, 1,400 employees, and there's a whole separate part of the Department of Insurance that are fraud investigators. So the point for me is that is a significant office to occupy, and it touches upon everybody who lives in California, whether you own a home or not. But when you've got a department that is responsible for supervising the collection of $409 billion in premiums, you'd think somebody would be up to the task. But anyway,
Mr. Chairman, if I could just, before we adjourn, if I could just quickly note on the schedule, we will meet August 22nd by Zoom, and we'll present the scoping memo reference today. But then there is a slight change. As commissioners know, we had planned to meet in person in Sacramento September 26th. That meeting has now been transitioned to a principally Zoom meeting, and we will meet in person in Sacramento on October 17th. I think Chair has already been in touch with all of you regarding travel arrangements for that meeting when most of you can attend in person. So just wanted to note that slight schedule change, Mr. Chairman, before we adjourn.
Thank you. So I don't have to get my clothes dry cleaned until September now. Perfect. Enjoy, everybody.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.